The doctor told me I have to write this. He said it might make me feel better. I don't think that's true. It has been so long that the doctors must know there is no getting better for me. You know what I think it is? Morbid curiosity. At my expense, of course. The doctors might have pretended to be empathetic at first, but they don't put the effort in anymore. Now I'm just an interesting case study that they pass around when they're having a slow day. And there's nothing I can do about it, except to take deep, slow breaths like Tabby taught me, and write. Tabby is my therapist. She doesn't let me call her Dr. Gron. She said that we're friends. That sounds cheesy, but she's the only person that cares about me here. The one person, interestingly enough, who has never manipulated me. She still believes there's a chance for me. She only wants me to be happy. Okay, deep breaths, in and out. Why do they want to read this? They know the story anyway. Perhaps they are looking for inconsistencies. Enough stalling, here I go. I can't say that I didn't like Christmas, but it wasn't exactly my favorite holiday. Yes, there's feel-good movies and hot chocolate and presents and family time. Yes, there's Christmas carols and Christmas cookies and Christmas dinner. Yes, there's Santa and elves and reindeer. But there's also Christmas trees, and I hate Christmas trees. My parents used to think it was funny. It started when I was a really little kid, maybe around 5 or 6. I was too young to really help with decorating the tree, so my parents sent me to spend the day with my grandma, intent on surprising me with a fully decorated Christmas tree when I got home. We'd never had a Christmas tree before because in the past we'd lived in a tiny apartment and didn't have the space for one. My parents had finally bought their own house and they wanted to go all out on the decorating. When I came home, there was this monster in the living room. It wasn't even recognizable as a tree once they were done with it. That was the problem. It was a huge green and red and gold monster, looming over me with menace. It looked like it was 10 feet tall. My parents hung up very classy ornaments, trying to make the tree look like something Martha Stewart would jizz over. But to me they didn't look elegant. They looked twisty and spiky and sharp, threatening. To top it off, there was no angel at the top of the tree. In its place was a Santa hat. It looked awful with those ornaments, let me tell you. My parents never were very up-to-date on what's fashionable. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. My point is that, with the addition of the hat, the monstrosity didn't look like a tree anymore. It looked like some kind of weird beast out of my nightmares, intent on swallowing me up and strangling me with its ropes of garland, stabbing me to death with its pointed ornaments. All while leering down at me, its eyes hiding under that god-awful hat. And I just knew it had eyes under there. Somewhere they were watching me, watching my every move. I screamed and cried and threw a fit. My parents were absolutely bewildered. When I was finally able to stutter out why I was so afraid, they laughed at me. Of course, it must have seemed very silly to them, and they didn't laugh to be malicious or cruel. But it really hurt me. Why couldn't they see how terrible that thing was? They got rid of the tree, and we didn't have one for many years after that. The story became very popular in our family. I hated hearing it every year, and I always hated Christmas trees after that. My attitude towards Christmas itself cooled off, too. I actually liked Halloween more. Those things were supposed to be scary. It was expected. The fact that nobody could see what was scary about Christmas trees upset me all the more. And what about all the other creepy Christmas traditions? The elf on the shelf, what sick fuck came up with that? And midnight mass on Christmas, where the church is dark but for 100 candles casting shadows against the stained glass. And don't get me started on Stalker Santa. So, yes, we celebrated Christmas in my house, but we didn't have a Christmas tree. Not until my younger brother came into the mix. He's 3 years younger than me. His name is Ethan. I tell myself that every day, to make sure I don't forget it. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up one day and his name will be gone forever. It feels that way whenever they change my medication. I won't forget. If that's the only good thing that comes from writing this down, so be it. Anyway, Ethan. When Ethan was 6, my parents decided to reintroduce the Christmas tree. They sat down and had a talk with me about how they wanted Ethan to have that experience, how I was old enough not to be afraid of a tree. I told them that of course I wasn't afraid. I'd gotten over that a long time ago. Inside though, I was sick with fear, but I couldn't let it show because I love Ethan. I love him more than anything in the world. I wanted him to have the best Christmas ever. So we got a tree. My parents tried to get me to help decorate. I wanted to refuse, but Ethan begged me and I just couldn't. So I helped string up the garland and the lights. The whole time, I felt like the fucking thing was mocking me. Laughing at me. I can't explain it. It was like it knew I was afraid, knew I felt the danger emanating from its branches. Once in a while a branch would scrape across my arm and I'd jump. It felt like the tree was reaching out for me. That was a long afternoon. Once the tree was decorated, I avoided it as much as possible. I stayed out of the living room when I could, and when I couldn't avoid it I kept my eyes averted. I thought that maybe, since I was a few years older, it wouldn't be so frightening, but I was wrong. It was even worse. I felt like it was mocking me in my fear. I know how it sounds. Anyway, Ethan absolutely loved the tree. He would sit in front of it every day after school, playing with the ornaments and lights. Sometimes, he'd get up in the middle of the night and curl up to sleep under the tree. My parents took a few pictures of him like that. They thought it was so cute. I wonder where those pictures are now. Not that anyone would let me see them. So, life went on. Christmas got closer and Ethan was getting more and more excited. He just loved Christmas so much, and I didn't, but I loved that it made him happy, and I was more than happy to play along with him to get him into the Christmas spirit. And then, before we knew it, Christmas Eve arrived. We had Christmas Eve traditions, like any family. We would all cuddle up in the living room with cups of hot chocolate and watch Christmas movies. Ethan and I would each get to choose one present from under the tree to open a day early. We would set out milk and cookies, and then we'd all go to bed. Sometime about half an hour after going to bed, my parents would shake jingle bells outside our rooms to convince us that Santa had arrived. At 9 years old, I obviously was much too old to believe in Santa, thank you very much, but Ethan loved it. So it was okay. But that Christmas Eve was different. It was different because I was sick. I really wasn't faking. I think my parents suspected I was, to get out of sitting in the living room near the Christmas tree. But I honest to God felt nauseous and freezing cold. I finally convinced my mom by asking her to take my temperature. I was running a pretty substantial fever. I remember her frowning as she looked down at the thermometer. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry I didn't believe you," she said. I can still see her in my mind's eye, flyaway strands of her long black hair falling in front of her eyes. My eyes looked just like hers. "We'll get you in bed. You can open the first present tomorrow," Dad offered, as consolation. I can't see his face as clearly, but I can see his stature, the way he dwarfed the room. He was invincible. I always felt that way. Nothing could beat my dad. Ethan gave me an extra long hug and even offered to give up opening a present early so I wouldn't feel left out. But I knew he'd be disappointed, so I told him to go ahead and open it and let me know in the morning what he got. The smile he gave me was so worth it. I went to bed, dozing into a fitful sleep, my brother's laughter drifting in and out of my ears as I slowly relaxed. The next few hours passed in a haze. I thought, perhaps, my fever had gotten worse because I kept hearing things. I heard my parents arguing about something. I heard something fall downstairs. I heard a strange rustling noise. The noises punctuated my dreams, a long string of nightmares about Santa and knives and shattered Christmas lights. I gasped into consciousness as I was dreaming about choking to death on a candy cane. It seemed rather silly when I woke up, but it doesn't seem silly now. It was about 3 in the morning when I woke up. I was feeling better, but I still had a bit of a fever. I decided to walk back down the stairs for a glass of water. I remember chuckling to myself, thinking about how surprised I'd be if I ran into Santa. Wouldn't that be something? But my giggling sounded a little strange in my ears. I was nervous. Why was I nervous? I couldn't trace the feeling to its source. I only knew that something about that night wasn't letting me relax. I walked down the stairs in the pitch black, not wanting to turn on the lights and wake anyone else up. I reached the landing and walked towards the kitchen. Okay. This is the part that gets hard. Deep breaths. Think of Ethan. I knew something was wrong. Even as I got a glass of water from the tap, I could sense it. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was going on at first, and then it hit me, the sound. See, this wasn't noise. It wasn't obnoxious and grating and immediately recognizable. It was just a slow, deep sound that was vaguely familiar, vaguely unsettling. And it was coming from the living room. My hand trembled around the glass as I stared across the kitchen. The kitchen opened directly into the dining room, which was connected to the living room. The door between the dining room and living room was shut. My parents had hung a Christmas wreath on it. It looked a lot less festive in the dark. For a long moment I just stared at the door, willing the sound to go away, but it didn't. The world doesn't work like that. I learned that lesson well that night. Eventually, I had to make a decision. I could go upstairs and go back to sleep, or I could buck up and see what was making that noise. I wanted so badly to just go back to bed, but I knew that I couldn't. Maybe if it was just Mom and Dad in the house, maybe then I would have gone to wake them up. But all I could think of was Ethan and how it was my job, as the older brother, to protect him. I crept across the kitchen, through the dining room, and ended up staring at that door. The sound was louder over there. It took me a few more minutes to work up the courage to open the door. I told myself that it would be like ripping off a band-aid. Opening the door would be the worst part, and then everything after that would be okay. Isn't it funny? Not really, I guess. I opened the door. My whole life ended in a moment. My parents were on the floor, their bodies twisted and crumpled together. They looked like they'd been flayed alive, their skin hanging in ribbons off their bodies. The air was so thick with blood you could taste it in the back of their mouth. My parents, on that floor, and I couldn't tell where one body started and the other body began, ripped and pulled and flayed apart. But I didn't get much time to look at them, because a thin, wheezing sound caught my attention. I dragged my eyes over to the tree, the source of the sound. That deep rumbling was somewhere in the background, but it was no longer a priority at this point, as you can imagine. No, that wheezing noise was somehow more pressing, and it only took a second to figure out why. Ethan, in the tree. Breathe, keep breathing, I'll get through this. Ethan was in the tree, as in, his head and one of his arms was sticking out of the branches. The rest of the body was somewhere deeper in the thickness of the monstrosity. The wheezing sounds were the pitiful attempts he was making to keep breathing. I wouldn't learn until much later that such sounds are referred to as a death rattle. I shrieked and ran towards him, stumbling over a bloody hand. I still don't know whose it was. Ethan was being pulled further and further into the tree, his eyes glazed over with a thick kind of haze. I desperately wanted him to look at me, but he seemed incapable of doing so. Oh God, oh Jesus Christ. He didn't hear me. I grabbed his arm and yanked. I was his big brother. I was his hero. I was going to get him out of the tree, and somehow everything would be okay. The wheezing sounds got worse as I struggled. It felt like he was tied to the tree. That's how strong its grip was, but I was determined. I knew I could do it. Eventually, I pulled him free and we stumbled back together. I fell hard on my ass, clutching my baby brother to my chest, elated that I had saved him, except that I hadn't. I'd only saved half of him. His body ended at about the waist, thin shreds of flesh and muscle hanging down in strings. His intestines were hanging out, too, at least what was left of them. It almost looked like... God, it almost looked like the tree had eaten them. I tried talking to him, then. I remember thinking that I could still fix it. Hey, Ethan, hey, wake up please, Ethan, come on, wake up, it's Christmas. You can't go away on Christmas. He never even heard me. He was basically dead already, although it took a few more moments for his heart to actually stop beating. I sat there in the middle of the living room, my parents bleeding into the carpet behind me, my dead baby brother twitching in my arms. I sat there and I looked at the Christmas tree. And I listened to the deep, rumbling sound, the sound of something pulling in and pushing out. The tree shook a little with it, its pine needles quivering in time. It was the sound of the tree breathing. Usually, this is the part where I tell you that I blacked out and don't remember a thing. That the police found me the next morning, rocking my baby brother back and forth and singing Christmas carols, and I only know about that because you've told me about it over and over and over. Well, here's something new for you to analyze. I remember every goddamn second of that night that never seemed to end. I spent it staring at that tree in abject terror, knowing for a certainty that it would come for me. Knowing that it would eat me alive, too, just as it had done to my brother. Knowing that its needles had sharpened and hardened when we weren't paying attention, and that they had been used to flay my parents apart. The tree swayed and shivered throughout the night, and I just knew that at some point, it would bend over and reach out for me and sweep me into the maw that was hidden somewhere deep in the branches. Except it didn't. Eventually, the quivering stopped, the breathing stopped. The tree was still a stone, but for the trickles of blood still falling from its needles. It was a few minutes later that the police came through the door and found me sitting there. Our neighbors had called the cops. I must have screamed at some point during our standoff, or several points, it didn't matter. They came and they found me and they took me away and now I'm here. But that, you already knew, so, that's it. There you go, you made me write it out, and now you can share it with your colleagues and laugh at me. I know you do. I can hear the laughter in their voices at my expense. You know what the worst part about being stuck here is? It's not being treated like I'm crazy. I don't give two shits about that. It's the fact that you've deprived me of everything that has to do with my family, and you don't even care. I don't have pictures of them. I don't have any of their belongings. I don't even know what you did with the house. Is it still empty? I wonder. Would anyone dare buy it? I never even found out what present Ethan opened that night, the night before. I think about that a lot. What his last toy was. You don't tell me what the police found during their investigation, not that it matters, because I know what happened. But do they? Maybe they think I did it. Maybe that's why you're keeping me here. In the end, though it doesn't matter, my life ended that night. Do you even understand that? It was over the moment I opened that door. I opened the door to eternal night, one that I can never escape, and you bastards are enjoying watching me suffer in it. Merry fucking Christmas.